Okay, so now it's time for Daniel to entertain us with his presentation. Geopolitics of our energy supply, yet another case for green energy sovereignty.
Perfect. Thank you, Alan. All right. So some of you might have saw that we were going to have Rusted Gate Farms, our friends in agriculture, this meeting, but unfortunately agriculture waits for no man, and they had to drop out on us, so we were left looking for a speaker. And I realized in 2 years here with SOCAN, I have never given a general meeting talk, so I figured now is as good a time as any. And I almost rehashed a paper that I had written last year on 6 Faces of Climate Denial, but I'm getting bored of that when I've given that presentation like 7 times. So I'm like, hey, wait a second. My bachelor's degree is in international business, and some of you may have noticed that international businessy things are going on and international politicky things are going on. Perhaps I should give a presentation on geopolitics. Because it's just nice to have a non-controversial topic every now and again where we can all relax and nothing confrontational is going to happen. So I put together this presentation on the geopolitics in our energy supply. So I've broken the presentation up into 3 sections. The first section is what is going on with the war in the Middle East. And not that war in the Middle East, nor the other war in the Middle East, nor the other war in the Middle East. I'm of course talking about the current war in the Middle East. So we're going to look at what's going on in Iran and try and build a timeline of events so we have a basis of understanding. And I understand that some people might be like, Daniel, Miyamori, Habibi, please. Like, we all understand information. There's information everywhere. We know what's going on in Iran. But do we? Like, lately, the news has been a fire hose where we're just being slapped over and over again. Awful thing happening, awful thing happening, awful thing happening. And we never really get any resolution or any measure of what is actually going on. So we want to take some time to look at what happened in Iran, what is happening in Iran, and what is forecasted to happen as a result of the conflict in the Middle East. And then the second thing we're going to look at is the logistics of oil. So longtime climate fans will probably have seen the oil process before, but I really want to start at a high level macro and start to scale down. In particular, I found the answer to an interesting question of why the West Coast has really high gas prices compared to the rest of the US. And so we're going to talk through that from the overall concept of oil to a really granular level of how does it get here and what is our fuel mix here locally, to the point that I can pretty confidently say that there's a Shell, I think there's a Shell 6 blocks that way or so, and I can pretty confidently tell you the fuel mix in the tanks at that Shell station. So we're going to walk through the logistics of oil, and then we're going to get to the solution. And spoiler alert, the solution is we should have had renewable energy 10 years ago, but the best place, or the best time to plant a tree is yesterday, the second best time is today, so we're going to give it a go. So, before I jump in, one last disclaimer. I am talking about geopolitics in the Middle East, and I have 45 minutes to do that. I'm gonna leave a lot on the cutting room floor. It would pretty much take me 45 minutes to even start a summary of US involvement in the Middle East. So a lot of corners are gonna get cut, but I'm hoping that we have some understanding by the end, at least workable definitions of what's going on. So, to start off, we have a rough timeline, and it erased my background color, so I'm sorry for the assault of white on your eyes. But what happened so far? So on let's see if I can do that without setting off. On February 28th, the United States seemingly, to cover myself, seemingly was compelled by Israel to join in a joint military operation against the sovereign nation of Iran. So February 28th, bombs start flying. The US and Israel bomb most of Iran. Their targets, of course, were Iranian military assets, leaders of the regime, and a little bit of civilian infrastructure was just a casualty of war. So the US starts bombing. On March 1st, the IRGC responds, and I want to take a second because I keep hearing people conflate the IRGC with a group like Hezbollah or ISIS. The Islamic Revolutionary Guard is just the Iranian military. So they also have a navy and a Marines and an army. I don't know if they have a space force. I'm guessing they don't because we have the biggest and best space force. Our space force is the best, but I'll have to get back to you on the status of their space force. And so the IRGC launches an incredible, as a abject observer response to the aggression of the US and Israel, and they bombed pretty much everybody on March 1st. Like, those bombs were rated E for everyone, and everyone got a piece. So Saudi Arabia got bombed, Qatar got bombed, Bahrain got bombed, Kuwait got bombed, the UAE got bombed. There was initial reports of Iraq, but that could have just been fallout from being in between. There was some initial reports of Lebanon, but that could have been Hezbollah or Israel. And of course, Israel got bombed. It went everywhere. So the IRGC was mainly focused on targeting US assets, military assets in the region, Israeli military assets / just Israel, and then also oil and fuel infrastructure throughout the entire region. So that's why all the partners got hit, was an intentional targeting of their oil and gas infrastructure. And they did this to, make a statement. And it was really clear that this had been planned for a very long time. Like, this was flicking some dominoes over that had already been stacked. And so the world was rightfully taken aback, like, wow, they were really ready to respond in a very aggressive, thorough way. So that was March 1st. Sorry about the text, but it says tanker traffic drops by 70%. So March 1st is when we start to see the closing of the Strait of Hormuz. 70% stop about March 1st, and there's sort of a precipitous drop from that point. But then from February 28th and March 1st, we sort of start to get a back and forth and a back and forth. So one day US-Israel strikes, the other day Iran responds, back and forth through all of March and then the first few weeks of April. Backing up slightly, running away from me. So March 1st, and then about March 3rd is when we start to see the closures of petrol companies. So I believe the first one was Bahrain. Their petrol company declares force majeure on March 3rd. That's sort of legalese for we can't honor our contracts. And so they close their petrol company. And then following week or 2 weeks is when we see the rest of them declare that force majeure. It's just a French legalese word, but we see the Kuwaiti petrol company, the UAE, and the Qatarian petrol companies all close. And then we get to March 4th. March 4th is sort of the official closure date of the Strait of Hormuz. There really is no official line. It's not like the UN took a ribbon across the river and we're like, okay, it's closed now. Some reporting will put it on the 5th, some reporting will put it on the 6th or 7th. Most reporting puts it on the 4th, and that's what we'll be operating from today. So the 4th of March, Strait of Hormuz is closed. The rest of March, it's just bombing back and forth through about the second-ish week of April. And that's where we start to see talks about ceasefires. How good they've been is up for debate, but the bulk of the bombings happened in March through the first couple weeks of April, and most of the refinery damage that we're going to talk about also happened within that time frame. And then the last little tidbit down at the bottom is war is war. A rose by any other name, more or less. We've been hearing a lot of conversations. Is it a law enforcement operation? Is it a special military operation? You can ask Putin how well his special military operation went. But war is war, no matter how you try and dress it up with fancy language. So the fallout of this intense bombing campaign that was going on from February 28th to the second-ish week of April, what we see from that is about 10 to 15 million barrels of production capacity is lost. And so that's what is happening when the petrol companies declare force majeure and close their doors. They're not producing any more oil. So we've lost 10 to 15 million barrels per day of production capability. And then we also see the Brent crude oil index spike up to about 138. And right now, as of this morning, market opened at 116. Before the war, the Brent crude was at about 70. The happy zone for economists is about 60 to 90 per barrel. So we're well above that. And the 138 number was important because it's only $4 away from the highest that oil has ever been. Oil hit its peak at $143 right before the full collapse of 2008. And so we just hit on April 9th, $138 per barrel. Accounting for inflation is a record-breaking amount of cost per barrel of oil. And the other thing I want to point out is the Brent crude oil index is the gold standard of oil indices. I mention it because while doing research, I kept running across journalists who were quoting obscure oil indexes and be like, oh, look, this weird oil index has it at $80. Cool, that weird shop down the street is selling knickknacks for a penny. That doesn't affect the global market. So be careful when you're reading news reports. You always want to check for the Brent crude oil index. And then the last thing here is, even on a cursory glance of what's going on in Iran, you're going to see the 20% number. 20% of global seafaring oil goes through the Strait of Hormuz, and the Strait of Hormuz closed on March 4th. So that's 20% supply drop. That is 1/5 of the world's oil. The oil that we use every day and then rebuy every day just stopped moving. So setting the stage. So the oil stops moving, but the world doesn't stop moving, right? Every country is still using oil the way that they were. Maybe they've cut back slightly, but the global supply and inventory levels is going down, right? If you're running a $2 million deficit every month, you're just going to naturally keep trending down and down until the strait reopens and all the refineries are fixed and we get our production capabilities back. So when we start talking about inventories, we get a quote here from a Reuters article. Global observed oil inventories fell at a record pace in March and April, dropping by 460 million barrels, the International Energy Agency said in its latest monthly oil report. The 32-member International Energy Agency coordinated the largest ever release of stocks from strategic petroleum reserves in March, agreeing to withdraw 400 million barrels in an attempt to calm the markets. There's two key things that we need to take away from this passage. The first is just the scale of the numbers, and to put them into perspective, to give you a benchmark, the US typically maintains about 500 million barrels of strategic oil reserve. And so the 32 nations giving up 400 million barrels, just to put that into perspective, that's almost as much as the US holds in its reserves. We have already allotted 99 million barrels from our US reserve in March and committed a further 174 million barrels in April, May, and I think June. So we've already committed almost half of the US strategic petroleum reserves in order to calm the markets. And that's really important because really, if everyone didn't have these reserves, if we didn't pump 400 million barrels into the system, we would be looking at $400, $500 per barrel of oil right now. So all these countries had together to stand up and make sure that the markets hold, because we built everything on oil and financialization. And these is just one of the flaws that you get when you end up doing that. This is something that I don't have a ton of time to talk about, but I wanted to put it up just as a mention, if nothing else. When I say we've tied everything into oil, I do mean we've tied pretty much everything into oil. The only way that you could go 24 hours without touching the product of oil is if you went naked into the woods and spent 24 hours deep in the woods with nothing on you, because pretty much everything has some kind of oil attached to it. We see, and all of this is going to be more expensive in the coming months. Clothing, packaging, appliances, vehicles, electronics, office equipment, pharmaceuticals, personal care, consumer products, building materials, furniture, healthcare, HVAC, soap, fibers, plastic, adhesive, dyes, foams, resins, rubber, paints, industrial chemicals, like everything is in there. And we're still using it and we're still needing it. The last piece on petrochemicals that I'll give is sort of a public service announcement. If you're due for an oil change in the next 3 months, I suggest you do it very soon, like tomorrow, because the price of motor oil is going to be looped into a lot of this, and it is expected to at least double. I did mine this weekend, and I bought a couple of quarts just to keep in my apartment, in my strategic reserve. Flavia?
May I just make the point that food is not on there?
Mm-hmm.
Fertilizer is.
Yes, not an exhaustive list, just trying to, but
We can't eat oil.
have we tried? No, we can't eat oil. We need our food.
And the fertilizer.
And the fertilizer, right. So, God, there is so much that oil touches. It's borderline inconceivable. So there's our petrochemicals. So this is, man, the whiteness really got me on this. My apologies. Imagine, if you will, that on the top there it says worst case scenario. So since the war started, pretty much any economist worth their salt has been doing forecasts. So I could have picked any forecast from a million different people over the last 3 months approximately. But I chose this one from the International Commodity Information Service, which I'm sure you all know. I'm sure you're all subscribed to get your international commodity news. But I chose this one because it was written on March 2nd. So if we remember the timeline, that is just after the IRGC's response, but before the closure. So what is the worst case scenario that a contributor to the ICIS can think of before really knowing the full effects? And we can kind of look back and go, how accurate was this? So for the worst case scenario, oil supply losses reach 10 to 15 million barrels per day. You saw that on the other slide. We're already there. When we lost those 4 petro companies, we lost the capacity to produce 10 to 15 million barrels. So we can go ahead and check off that on the worst case scenario list. Brent crude oil index peaking between 110 and 150. Again, we've already seen that. So we're already 2 out of 3 of the way through the worst case scenario. And the third one is energy-intensive industries facing margin compressions and/or potential shutdowns. This one is the hardest to measure because private companies don't have to they don't have to tell you they're going through margin compressions. But once we start seeing energy-intensive industries like manufacturing start to close their doors, that is when we know for sure that we are 20 miles up shit creek without a paddle. So we don't want to see that one, but that will be the third and final check to say this overall summary written by John Richardson. Overall, a global recession is the central outcome, driven by high energy prices, supply chain breakdowns, and a collapse in consumer spending. And I know, especially here in the US, we're all getting a little tired of hearing the word recession because everything for the last year and a half has been a recession indicator. But I want to make a distinction of that adjective of global. That's when it gets really scary. Like that's when we're talking pandemic, that's when we're talking 2008. Internal recession we can manage. Say what you want about the Fed chair. The US coming out of the pandemic had one of the best recoveries in the world. Could it have been better? Do we really feel that way? A lot of that's wealth inequality, but by the numbers, our economics is one of the best coming out of the pandemic. But that's because we could control some of those elements. We can control internal recession elements. We can't control global recession. At that point, you're trying to get all 194 UN member states to agree on something. And I don't know if you've ever tried to get 10 people to agree on a pizza. It's really, really challenging to do. So the global part of that, and once we start seeing manufacturing shut down, that's when we know, without the shadow of a doubt, we are in global recession territory. Okay, so what is the result? What is the result of our investment? And I cheekily called it an investment because that's how we end up financializing all of our conversations, and especially some unsavory characters when we start talking about green energy at the end always love to say, well, what's the return on investment? Is solar actually that good? So let's frame this in terms of investment. We went, based on the Pentagon's numbers, we have already spent at least $29 billion on this conflict in Iran, at least. And we all know that the Pentagon is really bad with math. So that is at least. That is a very liberal floor. It is probably way higher than that, but that gives us a baseline. So we have spent at least $29 billion in Iran, and what did we get for it? What was the return on our investment for that $30 billion? As far as I can tell, there was one thing. There was one thing that I can tell, one concrete thing. What we did was we took Ayatollah Khomeini, we killed Ayatollah Khomeini, and we got another Ayatollah Khomeini. So we spent $30 billion to replace one old man with his son. That is the only thing that we got with that $30 billion investment. And that is the reason we don't have universal health care and all the other amazing things we should have in the richest country in the world, is because we keep doing dumb things like this, like spending $30 billion to wipe out a single guy and wreck the global economy along with it. It's just insanity, but okay. So we replaced Ayatollah Khomeini with Ayatollah Khomeini. At least that's something in some abstract way. All right, so that gives us a baseline to start with on what's happened. So Strait of Hormuz closes on the 4th, everyone got bombed, oil and gas infrastructure at a loss of about 15 million barrels per day. So let's talk about the logistics of oil. And we're gonna start really high level. Some people have definitely seen a chart like this. But from a macro perspective, how do you get oil out of the ground and eventually get it into the pump down the street? So we start with extraction. We find an oil deposit naturally occurring somewhere in the world. Maybe it's under the sand, maybe it's under dirt, maybe it's under rocks, maybe it's under water, under dirt, under rocks. But we find it and then we build an oil rig. We punch a drill down into the ground and we suck the oil out. It then goes either into holding and then into processing, or it goes directly into processing. And processing is not refinement, we'll get there in a second, but processing is just let's get the crude oil separated from all of the other stuff. Usually that's some off-gassing and or water. So after extraction and processing, we're left with crude oil, and then we have to get that crude oil somewhere. So there's three primary methods of transportation. There's land, sea, and pipeline. Pipeline can be on land or in the sea, but we'll separate it out because it's kind of unique. But typically you're going to take that crude oil and you're either going to put it on a ship to go somewhere, you're going to put it on a truck to go somewhere, you're going to put it on a rail to go somewhere, or you're going to send it via pipeline. And the ethos here is that it's cheaper and more effective to move crude oil than it is to move refined products. So that's why we want to ship crude oil from the Middle East to, say, the Gulf of Mexico, in order to then refine it here at the States before we then send it on to its end use case. It's much more dangerous and much more expensive to try and ship refined products across the sea. So transport. Last thing I want to say is the very large oil tanker question. I will give you the answer to that. So these very large oil tankers, and they're called very large oil tankers, not the most creative name, but we do what we do. These very large oil tankers are about 4 football fields long and about a football field across, and they move very, very, very slowly when they're full of oil. To the tune of any nautical heads, it's about 10 to 13 knots. And for non-nautical heads, you might be able to ride faster on your bicycle. Not vroom vroom, but like pedal power bicycle can go faster than one of these very large oil tankers. So there's a few different estimates. It depends on weather conditions, it depends on fuel load, it depends on the weight of the ships. But it takes about 3 months if you wanted to go from the Strait of Hormuz all the way to the Gulf of Mexico. And that's a really important number to remember, right? Because if we're calling the Strait of Hormuz closure March 4th, it has not been 3 months yet. So any ships that are arriving have left before the strait closed. And there's a cliff coming up in a lot of different respects for many different countries that oil is still in transit, and once it stops being in transit, then we get in a lot more trouble. So that's transportation. We move it to the refinery, which is as close as we can get it to the end use case. And then the refinery is when we turn different flavors of crude oil into different kinds of fuels. There's a lot of different flavors. I don't want to spend a lot of time on the different types, but we do the refinery process. This is also where we get petrochemicals as a part of this process. And then we go to distribution, and that's, again, getting it to the end use case. And there are, again, kind of 3 ways of transporting refined product: via pipeline, via truck/rail, or via ship. And so we get it to the end use, and then we use it in our cars or our lawnmowers or our grills or whatever we're going to use it for. So I said I was going to get us all the way to Oregon, though. So we got to start with this map of the US. This is dated March 11th, so the numbers are obviously lower, and we all wish we were still at 429 here in Oregon, because wouldn't that be amazing? But what I noticed first about this graph, why I pulled it out and ended up going down a rabbit hole, was I'm like, why is all of this red? What is going on over here? Why are we paying more than pretty much anybody else across the nation? There's a little bit of red up here in the Northeast, and Florida's always doing whatever Florida does. But the West Coast over here, there's a question of why are we so much more expensive? And there's 2 things that usually pop into people's heads. It's like, oh, it must be gas tax, right? Those damn liberals and their gas taxes running us dry. But here in Oregon, especially after the transportation package failed, we're staying at 40 cents per gallon is our state gas tax. And that is high. We're in the top 10 for gas taxes, but we're not in the top 5, just the top 10. And if you average the rest of them, the average gas tax is about 27 cents. So really we're about 13 cents higher than the national average. And 13 cents doesn't get us, from $3 to 30, like that doesn't quite get us there. Some of the more recent data suggests we're about $2 separated from the lowest part of the country. So 40 cents doesn't get us there. And the other thing people think about is, what about environmental protections, right? Again, those damn hippies and their environmental protections must be driving up the cost of fuel. It's much harder to put an exact cost on environmental protections for fuel, but the studies that I was looking at seem to suggest about 25 cents. So 40 cents and 25 cents, we're up to 65 cents, but that still doesn't get us to the $2 on average that we are higher than the rest of the country. So like, what is going on? Why are we so much higher than everywhere else? And then I found another map from the Department of Energy that I think will help us kind of map out why that is. And you'll be able to sort of intuit when I show you the next graph. I'm going to kind of go back and forth for a second, so keep your eyes on the red over here, Florida and the Northeast. And when we look at the next slide from the Department of Energy, we can sort of intuitively see that there's these strange gaps. And I'll tell you what this chart is in a second, but I just kind of want to give us a chance to see, you know, just the raw information here, that we have these gaps here in Florida, the Northeast, and then we go back to this one. So from the Department of Energy, this graph shows us naturally occurring oil basins and gas basins in the US. It shows us our shale deposits. That's the lighter color and the darker color, respectively. And then the lines are all of our pipeline infrastructure. So I mentioned that we want to get the crude oil as close as possible before it's refined and before it's sent off. So we can see that predominantly we're getting most of our fuel down here. There's a ton of refinery clusters in this space, and then it gets shipped after it's refined to all the places that have pipelines. And so that helps move the fuel as efficiently as possible, and that's why the heartland has typically lower amounts, is this combination of pipeline infrastructure and the ability to extract nearby, refine it, and use it locally without having to source it from other places. Florida is still doing its own thing. We see up here, dipping into Canada a little bit to get to the Northeast. I wish this map had refineries, but it doesn't, unfortunately. There's no really refinery technology other than a little bit of refinery and a little bit of refinery. So that's why the Northeast also has that sort of higher edge. But they are at least somewhat connected. So us over here, you'll notice there's a big gap right here. That is, of course, the Rocky Mountain Range. So you can't punch a pipeline through the Rockies. It doesn't make sense to go over the Rockies. And so we just don't have pipeline infrastructure over here. So when we're looking at the West Coast in particular, we'll start with California. So California does have some refineries down here in the Los Angeles area, and you can see that they have some extraction capabilities, but it's not really enough. So one of the reasons California is so high is because they have to import most of their fuel, and they import most of it refined already. And so that adds to the cost. Because remember, the GDP of California is measured at the scale of like countries. Like just California at one point was in the top 10 GDPs of the world. That takes a tremendous amount of energy to process and to get to that economic scale. And so they also don't have any pipelines going into the north area here. There is an ability to ship to the port of Humboldt around the top area, so it kind of lessens. But again, they're importing so much refined material that that price directly goes into the price you're paying at the pump in California. And they're mostly self-sufficient. So California doesn't really share with us, and driving from LA to Jackson County is farther than driving from Seattle or Portland down to Jackson County. So if we're shifting our attention upward, the other unique feature we see in the Pacific Northwest is there is no naturally occurring oil or gas, right? There's nothing below our feet here in Oregon or Washington. And we kind of intuitively know that because otherwise we would be extracting it. We wouldn't have just left it there. But what that means is that not only do we not have pipeline infrastructure, we have no refining infrastructure, and we have no ability to pull our own oil and fuel out of the ground. I'll take a brief second because I'm starting to sound like I'm pitching for pipelines. I am not pitching for pipelines. I'm just saying economically it is how we get things around the country faster.
Is Martinez not a refinery town?
Martinez.
Yeah, it's in the north part of San Francisco Bay.
It's north of San
Yeah.
Francisco.
It's north.
So yeah, it's basically that side.
The last The last chart I saw with refinery capability didn't list it. Maybe it's just too small to have been captured. Like maybe there is some refinery, but it wasn't big enough for the last graph that I looked at. I wouldn't be surprised because if we look at where the pipeline ends and knowing that refineries like to sit at the ends of pipelines, it would not surprise me if around San Francisco had some refinery. But overall, it's just not enough to support a global GDP. So back up here. So what is Oregon to do? Well, in Oregon, we import 100% of our fuels, but because we can't refine it, we have to import it refined, so that adds price on top. And all of the fuel in Oregon comes through the critical energy infrastructure hub here in Portland. You might have heard us talk about the CEIH. It's one earthquake away from a problem, but I don't have a lot of time to spend on it because I'm trying to get us to that Shell station, and we're gonna make it. I'm looking at the clock, and we're gonna make it to that Shell station. So what we see here is the end of a pipeline in the Puget Sound area, and that's where Oregon gets all of its fuel, because it's cheaper to refine it here in the top of Washington and send it to the critical energy infrastructure hub, where it then gets distributed throughout Oregon. So we're getting closer, but where does this fuel come from that is here in Seattle? So the Seattle Puget Sound refineries, it's about an 80-20 split with a little bit of variability, but typically it's about 80% Alberta and 20% Alaska. So that fuel mix is going to the Puget Sound area and getting refined. I say there's variability because depending on a million factors, it was too sunny, a pipeline is leaking, we needed extra oil one day for some reason. You can add about 1 to 4% of just other fuel. Oil as a global commodity is not usually traced very well once it kind of hits that commodity status. So 80% Alberta, 20% Alaska, 4% other. It doesn't really matter. Oil is oil. So it gets refined up here in the Puget Sound. It goes down the I-5 into the critical infrastructure hub, and then it gets dispersed from there all across the state. And since we can't take boats from the critical energy infrastructure hub to Jackson County, we're largely shipping it via truck and via rail. And as those costs go up, that's how we get to that $2 here in Jackson County, is that all of our fuel, our Canadian, Alaskan fuel, it has to come by truck and by rail. And so we pay the premium on that. I think that's the last thing I want to say. So yes, so the Shell down the street, I can say with some level of confidence is 80% Alberta fuel, 20% Alaskan fuel, with some variability of other, 1 to 4% other. So that's the fuel mix of your local pump. I think I'm done with this one. So let's move on to global commodity markets. The reason everyone got out of bed this morning was to hear about global commodity markets. I'm super excited to talk about it. I almost didn't include this, but there's an argument that keeps popping up that I want to just put a nail in and seal the coffin. But to start out, so a commodity is traded like anything that is not unique. So if I had a handful of iron ore from Argentina and a handful of iron ore from Australia, it's iron ore. It's traded as if it's iron ore. Wheat and soybeans are also, it doesn't matter where it comes from, it matters that it is and it exists. So we treat oil the same way. It really doesn't matter where the oil comes from. Asterisk, there's a few different flavors, you gotta get the right flavor of crude, but for the most part, we don't really care where the oil comes from. And so what happens in a global commodity market, I don't love this analogy, but I find it to be the most useful. Imagine pouring all of the world's oil supply into a giant bathtub. And then everyone who wants some of that oil stands around the bathtub and bids in an open market. And so that's how we get some of those market fluctuations on the cost of oil. If you need it and you're willing to pay X amount, you get it. If you don't have enough money to pay at the bathtub, you do not get the thing. So we see global market commodities, and I keep seeing this argument, which is, if the US is a net oil exporter, why don't we just keep our oil and use it for ourselves? And that's adorable, but there's 3 reasons why that's wrong. The first is that just because we're a net exporter does not mean we don't import, it just means we export more than we import. We still import a tremendous amount of oil all across our country for uses in a myriad of things. The second reason is the US largely produces shale, which is not super useful for a lot of the things that we do. It's typically heavy industry and other uses, and we don't have as much of that here in the US, so we ship out the shale and we use that surplus money to buy the premium products that we need here. And then the last part is I keep getting tripped up by this we. Like the last time I saw this argument, I was like, why don't we keep our oil? You're right, wouldn't it be great if we had a system where we pooled resources together and shared it based on equity? That's socialism, which we should endorse as a political theory, but unfortunately we live in a capitalist system. There is no our oil, right? The US does not own refineries. Private companies own refineries. There is no sharing between Texas and Oklahoma. It is whether Oklahoma can buy the oil that just happens to be in Texas, which is just pure insanity to me. That our oil, it is not our oil. We do not own oil and oil infrastructure. So now we get to the solution. So the solution, as I mentioned at the beginning, is of course, we should be building renewable energy and we should be building at scale.
Can I interrupt?
Please.
We go back to the last slide, when you say we don't, isn't it true that like in Alaska or some states, they actually give a dividend to the citizens for the use of their resources in some states?
In Alaska.
So that's a case where there is a we.
This is interesting.
But
They don't own the oil, but they get a benefit for being a citizen of.
Oh, there's a Norwegian we, okay. Like a sovereign citizen fund.
And there's a monetary incentive to export it all, so they get a financial gain in the short term.
Yeah, they can sell it for more money sending it out, and they can sell it here.
Please keep going, I need a drink. All right. So the solution is renewable energy. And I could almost just end the conversation there because we've all been bombarded with why renewables are good, but I'll take a stab at it for another couple of minutes because I'm almost out of time, but Kathy hasn't thrown anything at me yet. So here's a simple graph one of our SOCAnistas made out of Ashland, just to drill down yet again, that's why I called the talk Yet Another Case for Green Energy. We can see clearly solar and wind, some of the cheapest energy you can possibly produce. Gas is too expensive, coal is too expensive, and nuclear is for AI-powered people. That's the nicest way I'm going to put that. So what we need, though, is we need energy sovereignty. I'm becoming more and more attached to that word because the framing lends itself a little bit more to the types of folks who might just brush against clean energy if you just approach it as clean energy. But when we talk about sovereignty, we're talking about rugged individualism. Don't you want Oregon to be safe and secure and be able to power itself in its fullness? That's where this language helps us. So these are sort of the why we should adopt solar or renewable energies. We have massive untapped potential. Solar farms, community solar, offshore wind, tidal, onshore wind, geothermal in some parts of the state. We have the ability to generate what we need. We know what the answer is. The answer is do the thing. We just struggle getting the political capital to push the actual capital towards solving the problem. Resiliency, distributed local power grids cannot be disabled by a single point of failure at a centralized transit hub, e.g. the critical energy infrastructure hub. I mentioned that the CEIH in Portland is like one bad day away from the entire state not having fuel anymore. So it's a problem we're going to need to address at some point. But we also shouldn't put all of our ducks in a very easily earthquakeable basket. We want to have the ability to generate and transform and transmit renewable energies here locally. Again, my apologies on the color of the slides here, but for security, we should also have a closed loop grid as it functions entirely independently of the global commodity bathtub. We're not subject to the whims of the global commodity market. We don't end up losing our pants at the pump just because the ghost of Dick Cheney broke into the White House and tried to convince everyone that we just didn't find the weapons of mass destruction. We just have to go back and find them. We didn't look hard enough the first 4 times. So, we are immune to this if we have local renewable energy storage, local renewable energy generation, and local renewable energy transmission. Just to emphasize here, so again, dependency leads us to global volatility. It leads to the whims of the ghost of Dick Cheney. Transit choke points. The Strait of Hormuz is the most obvious choke point, but it is not the only choke point across the world. I also have China invades Taiwan on my bingo card. There's another choke point over there. Fragile supply chains. How many times have non-business people had to say the word supply chain coming out of the pandemic? And yet we did nothing to secure our supply chains in any way, shape, or form. We recognized the problem and went, maybe one day we should do something about that. Again, you should probably plant the tree yesterday, but we didn't, so let's plant it today. And the bonuses for sovereignty is, of course, local infrastructure, immune to geopolitics, not immune to politics. If anyone's tried to talk to a county commissioner, they might know that you're still going to have to face some politics. But again, the ghost of Dick Cheney can't haunt you when you're local. And circular local grids, the ability to have different grid locations. So if any one fails, we have backups. We have the capacity to keep what we need for our economies and our lives to just run smoothly. And I think, oh yes, what can I do? So you want to help with electrification. You might have seen in the SOCAN newsletter, we've been partnering with the Grants Pass Energy Action Team, Electrify Oregon, and SOCAN to make Electrify Rogue Valley. What we're trying to do is trying to help coach people through the process of electrification. So trying to make it as easy as possible to navigate incentives, to understand when you should upgrade. Maybe it's not the right time to put in a heat pump. Maybe that's a couple of years from now, but start to have those conversations and make things simpler for when you're ready to do the process of electrification. If you're interested in learning more, the button right at the beginning of our website has a sign up if you're interested in either getting help or being coached or helping do the coaching. We can put you into a training program and you'll feel really confident helping other people electrify. Because I guarantee the people who have EVs right now are living their best lives, and the rest of us are not living our best lives. I was at the bar about a week ago, and this guy was like, "Oh yeah, I've been driving my EV. I didn't even notice what the pump was at." And I was like, "That you just keep living that dream, man. I don't know what that life is like." So yes, thank you very much for listening. I'll take any questions we have if that doesn't explode on us. And yeah, thank you very much.
I was curious, if we went back to driving a speed limit of 55 miles an hour, what difference would that make in the use, supply, the price?
You will never believe this. I watched an episode of Mythbusters 20 years ago, and I know the answer to that question because it's stuck into my head. So they took like a single liter of fuel and then drove it around a track at different speeds, 20 miles an hour, 40 miles an hour, and 80 miles an hour. And at 80 miles an hour, you burn through fuel at about double the rate. So if you're ever trying to get to the gas station, go slower. Going faster will not help you get there. So by reducing speed limits, we would reduce the amount of gas consumed.
So are we incapable as a nation of suggesting that people slow down?
Suggesting is a strong word. We could start with the I-5 corridor because there seems to be a little bit of everybody. People in the left lane going 45, people in the right lane going 90. So maybe we just need to adjust where they're transferring and then we can get to a solution. But I see your point there. Wow, I covered everything so well. No one has any questions. Wow. Oh, the shyest person in the room steps up.
All right, so if we get rid of the dependence on oil, we aren't dependent on the global commodities market. But you are not mentioning dependence on rare earths and lithium markets for all these lovely batteries we're going to have.
Yep, for sure. Right now, we are very dependent on lithium for fuel storage, especially or for energy storage here in the U.S. But we're pretty much the only ones still doing that. China is about 30 years ahead of us in sodium batteries. And there's a difference between types of batteries in that when you need the power, sometimes you do just need lithium because if I forget the sciencey word, I'm going to get yelled at, but it conducts faster than sodium. Sodium is really good for storing it for long periods of time, like capturing solar and using it on a rainy day. But there will be some lithium uses, and the question is, where do we get it? How do we recycle better of all the lithium that we've already pulled out of the ground? And how do we not screw up any more natural resource land? Absolutely.
That's my problematic cousin's contribution to the argument is, what about lithium?
Yeah.
So this came up in my mind from your question. If you're driving an electric vehicle, at what speed do you get your maximum mileage?
A purely electric vehicle or a hybrid?
Purely electric.
That I do not have the question for.
It all depends on the terrain and the elevation. So your car will tell you how to do that if you have an electric vehicle.
Yeah, I will say I'm still looking at the fuel costs.
Yeah, it shows you how fast you're using it up. So, so there's no one given speed.
Yeah.
Gary?
I had one question, but I also have two answers.
Do you want to?
Yeah, you want me to take over? As to the lithium and the rare earth minerals and all that go into battery storage and solar panels, they recycle and can be made back into new batteries and new solar panels. And you cannot recycle the gas you burned. As for which way you get better mileage, running my hybrids, and a hill, same thing. When you're driving on a hilly condition versus a flat condition, you're way better mileage because the energy you use going up the hill, you spend like you do your gas. When you're going down the hill, your gas engine keeps running and consuming gas, and your hybrid or electric car is refueling its tank. It's actually regenerating, so you get much better range on hilly driving, I've found, than on flat out driving on an electric or hybrid. And my question was, I didn't want to say it when you were in that section, but if California is a net producer, why isn't that able to be a closed loop? And why is it the highest price gas in the country? They're still pulling from the same bathtub that Kansas is.
I think I'm understanding where you're going. I might have misspoke that California is a net importer of fuels. But if we...
I thought they were an exporter.
The US is a net export.
The U.S. total is a net exporter. But let's go back to this one here.
Yeah.
So the California area has some capacity to create their own fuel by pulling it out of the ground and extracting it, but they, isolated from the rest of the U.S., they import refined product higher than anyone else. So Texas usually imports raw materials and then synthesizes it and sends it off, but they're pulling in a lot of raw material.
And I think California produces a lot of shale, which is a lower grade.
Yeah, some of those dark patches are kind of hard to see, but
Suitable for like gasoline production. It's only suitable for
yeah.
industrial use.
And California also, I mean, you'd spend a lot of time on California, but they also turn their refineries on and off periodically for environmental purposes. So they just restarted it within the last few months to start getting capacity back up in order to help stave off the probably $8 gas, $9 gas that California is going to see in the next couple of months. Gary?
I didn't know I wanted to ask a question, but I think I do. Asking it not as much a question as a statement. I think resiliency is sort of a theme of pretty much everything we're involved in, and you're speaking about a big one because energy is so fundamental to our country. But essentially, distributing and getting away from centralized structures for energy, particularly, think power plants, and making a distributed non-point system for pretty much everything we do, including food and energy of all sorts. All of those things we'd be better off if we were decentralized to some degree. I mean, and that where exactly that comes out is You know, that's a policy decision on all other things being equal, you make your best shot. But as a goal, I think it should be a fundamental goal of basically all of our advocacy, you know, regardless of the specific thing we're referring to.
Yeah, I see there. I think what it just makes me think of, not to challenge, but you know, there's definitely trying to find that line between decentralized and centralized, right? I heard a really interesting fact about Oregon at the Nonprofit Leadership Conference a couple of months ago, that Oregon has one of the most amounts of nonprofits, like per capita. And at some point, we're doing a really good job of decentralizing. We have, you know, 20,000 nonprofits, almost 30,000 in the state. But at some point, you have to ask a question of like, have we decentralized too far? And then where's that balancing act go?
Yeah, or are silos too strong?
Yeah.
I just wanted to add something on the storage part. I've spent over 40 years in the storage industry, and I remember reading about sodium batteries back in the 80s. The buses in London were electric, or some of them were. And also, well, I think it was Aquiance was a company that came out with sodium batteries in the late 80s or early 90s. They've gone out of business because they just did not work. I think Cattle, the Chinese company, has come out with a sodium battery. I think it was Cattle. But they're claiming big things, but they just did not last. Lithium is the, at the present time, there's hundreds of electrical storage chemicals, but lithium is the iron phosphate chemistry is the one I think that is going to be here for a while.
Appreciate that. In the same vein, I think, you know, especially when it comes to battery storage, we need more advancement in battery storage technology. And if we took the subsidies that we are already giving to fossil fuels and redirected them into R&D, we could solve almost all of these problems on a very rapid timescale. We just choose not to.
Batteries are getting more efficient and cheaper by 3 to 5% a year, which is incredible.
Thank you for a great overview of the consumer level oil and how it gets to us. Would you say that for jet fuel productions, so everything that the air transport and air travel relies on, is the pattern of production the same? Is it the same companies, the same refinery pattern, or is it a completely different market, completely different bathtub? Or is the pattern of global distribution the same? And if the current geopolitical situations continue and predictions come true, are we going to see jet fuel / plane fuel prices impact as much?
So I was really focused in my research trying to get just straight down the line of like what's in the pump down the street. What I can say is once we've refined that crude oil into something else, it gets removed from the bathtub. So there isn't as much of a commodity market for refined fuels because they're really hard to transport. I mean, you can put them in a plane, but you're going to use it by the time you get to where you're going. But I think that's the most I can say about that. I would speculate that the price of crude is going to go hand in hand with the price of jet fuel. I feel pretty confident in saying it's one of the reasons that Spirit Airlines? Yeah, just went out of business because they were running nothing margins, and the nothing margin went away, and then what do? You close your door. So.
Hi, one recent estimate that I heard about free energy was that it was about 10 years away, and that also that AI solutions might help bring it to us. Do you have anything to say about that?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I felt better about AI about 2 years ago, and now I'm rapidly turning into one of the most aggressive anti-AI people you could meet. insanity. There's a local entrepreneur in Ashland who is very big into AI and recently released a paper that I think very well explains everything wrong with relying on AI to solve all your problems. The paper was about SOU and a plan to save SOU, and it completely missed the mark, about as far as you could possibly miss the mark. Right now, AI seems really good at annoying people, defrauding older people, using all of our fresh water. I'm just not seeing, other than really convincing videos of Will Smith eating spaghetti, that we're actually getting, I mean, it's been years now, like 2 full years of people having access to base level AI tools. Our newsletters are going, like, I'm getting more spam in my Gmail. Like, I haven't seen this, maybe it's 5 years away, like Elon Musk's flying cars are still 5 years away, but I'm rapidly losing faith. And just the way that they're pushing these massive, unbelievably massive data centers at any cost, just without any reservations, like, let's build this the size of the moon because it's going to solve all our problems. I just can't believe it anymore. I don't think that we need to wait for AI to solve some of these problems when a lot of it is build more solar panels, build more wind farms, tap into geothermal more. Like, we're not missing answers, we're kind of missing the political capital to just go do the thing we already know how to do. There may be some advancements waiting for us. I think the medical field has had the most success utilizing AI for different kinds of treatments. But man, I just get nervous every time I see AI. Oh, I have a really good example. I was looking at the Brent crude oil index on Saturday evening. I was hanging out with a friend, and I was looking at the Brent because I'm just staring at it now. And when you Google the Brent tracker, Google will automatically pull up the Brent tracker with their tracking code. I forget what their ticker is. And you look at it on the Google summary and you're like, oh, okay, so I have some idea. But I've been looking at that number in government documents. And I'm like, wait a second, it doesn't show the 138 spike. What's going on? Oh, that's an AI summary that just pulled the wrong numbers. And I was like, oh, cool, yet another thing that we have to deal with. You can't even trust a Google search anymore because it's going to get fed through an AI system.
I have my own questions about AI.
Yeah, I know, I wasn't,
It's like,
yeah.
I think it depends on bad actors, just like the internet.
Mm-hmm.
But what do you think about free energy as a possibility?
As a concept, when we get there, I will be supportive. Until then, I'm going to go back to, we know what we need to do. We're just not doing it. So.
So this is just an observation. When you started talking about AI, back around 1998, I was working for a router company, and they said, we're going to make it so that you don't have to commute to work again. And we have that capability, we just don't. And during the pandemic, it came in handy because we could all work from home and avoid getting sick and dying. But because we had all this commercial property that was sitting there doing nothing, we had to shove everybody back to work and back to their commuting habits. So I think this is something that we really need to emphasize. It's doable and it's necessary. Just pretend we're in a pandemic and stop driving around.
Thanks very much indeed. Wonderful presentation, Daniel. I've been waiting for somebody else to mention the Critical Energy Infrastructure Hub for months since I've been working on that committee. The reason that Daniel, this is a piece of information, the reason Daniel mentioned the Critical Energy Infrastructure Hub is one day away from disaster is because all of these tanks are sitting on quicksand, and when the subduction zone hits, that thing is going to explode, and we're going to have no energy in Oregon. We have to be concerned about that. The legislature is trying to do something, but there are a lot of people who are looking at that Critical Energy Infrastructure Hub and saying, oh, that's a Portland problem, that's a Portland problem. It's bonkers. Thank you.
I couldn't quite remember where I heard about the Critical Energy Infrastructure Hub. I should have guessed.
I forgot what I was going to say, but actually that's another example of what I was talking about earlier, that energy hub is the fact that it, and actually it does lead it to the AI thing. My son is an AI engineer for biomedical, and he's actually in India right now, working on, I couldn't even tell you what he's doing. But anyway, but the point, I think, and with some point, that because he is an AI engineer, and he is doing things with it that are going to help people, save lives, but it's a tool, and this is the way he talks about it. And I think that that's a really important thing to remember relative to the comments that are being made about the negative aspect of it. And when it starts being a social contract, and when it starts running your life, that's when any tool becomes problematic. And we keep elevating the ante, sort of culturally, around those problems, and people don't really know. They're just, and that's the serious issue with it. And actually, it comes down. I think somebody made the reference: bad actors. I mean, garbage in is still garbage in, and it creates garbage out. And when people have agendas and they get a hold of something, and the problem is that the problem with the AI is that it is this exponential capability of turning it into something that's, goes out of control. And but if we could remember that it's a tool, it would save us a lot over time.
Fair point. All right. It seems like we're good. So I need to talk about SOCAN stuff for just a minute, if I can. Oh, I knew you were going for it. I was trying to be cool.
So let us take a moment to thank you, Daniel.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Well, I still have to talk. Okay. Perfect. Appreciate it. So now we're going to run through a few SOCAN-related events. So next month's general meeting, we have Flavia, who's in the room today, is going to be our speaker next month, doing a topic on creating a positive feedback loop for taking climate action. So stay tuned for June's monthly meeting. You might be able to catch Flavia afterward and get a sneak peek. We also wanted to encourage you to come and join us on the 4th of July. Every year, SOCAN has a parade entry and a booth at the 4th of July. We need some more people to help fluff out our parade entry, and if you're interested in just hanging out in the shade for the boothing activity, you can join us for that. The sign up is on the calendar on our website, or presumably Kathy has a sign up back there. I'm sure she does. Please follow us on the social medias, the likes, the subscribes. It helps us grow, particularly the YouTube channel where we're putting up these recordings. It has recordings back to like 2019. There's some great content hiding in there. And that little subscribe button is free and helps us grow. All of our events can be found on the SOCAN calendar, socan.eco/events. Let's see, next month we have the Federal and State Project. The Federal and State Group is still looking at hosting 2 candidate forums later this fall if you want to join us in the planning process for our 2 candidate forums before the midterm elections in November. You can reach out to Alan, or again, there's a link on the SOCAN calendar. And then the next meeting will be June 8th via Zoom at, I didn't write down the time, is it 2:30? 2. And then we get to Sustaining Climate Activists. The next meeting is Saturday, June 27th. This is where we have, this is where we have a sort of a climate activist support group, understanding that many people have been fighting the climate fight for many, many years and are needing to remember it's a marathon and needing a space to be. So we have 2 excellent facilitators, Ken Devaney and Maud Powell. So please come and join us, it's free. I think the location is...
Changing to Blue Heron Park in Phoenix.
Because the weather is better. So on June 27th, and I'll make sure that's updated on the website, but June 27th we'll be doing that outside at Blue Heron Park in Phoenix. And then we have a few partner events. So KS Wild has been doing a monthly Defenders of the Wild Activist Night. The next one will be June 25th, 5:30 to 6:30. They're bringing in a speaker and doing some art activism, I think this month, but they've been doing our series for the last several months, presumably gearing up for a potential mining fight. June Open Lands Day for the Southern Oregon Land Conservancy is on June 13th, 10 to 2. That's where they open up their preserves for people to go experience the absolutely insane amount of conservation land that SOLC is currently protecting. We have the 7th annual Turtle Trot with our friends over at the Crest of Willow-Witt. Fortunately, that got too big, but up at the Crest of Willow-Witt, there's a 1K, a 5K, and a 10K to celebrate their 7th annual Turtle Trot to support Willow-Witt and their turtles. And then Blues, Brews, and Bluegrass is happening June 6th from 2 to 8 in support of the Rogue Valley Food System Network. I think I've been the last couple of years. Fantastic experience. Please show up and support. Also check out our friends over at the Rogue Valley Voice, longtime supporters. They also manage an eco-calendar of things that are happening in the valley, in case you're curious. And then lastly, we just want to take some time to thank you all for being here. And we appreciate you for coming out on a lovely rainy day. I was super excited that the rain came back for just a minute to remind me that 115 degrees is coming soon, but it's not here yet. We get to enjoy just a little bit more rain, and I'm comfortable with that. So thank you all for being here. Before I let you go, I do have one more announcement to make. In early February, I applied to Portland State for my MBA program, and I was accepted. So starting about next month, I'm going to be relocating up to Portland to do my master's and get settled for that program. My plan is to get the master's at PSU and then go do my doctorate in Europe, because I've been surrounded by so many PhDs. I'm like, well, I can do that. I can go get my PhD too. So I'll be relocating in the interim. I'll be supporting SOCAN remotely. I'll pop down occasionally if they need me. But thank you so much for the people in this room that I've worked with over the last 2 years. I just wanted to extend that thank you and let you know what's going on with me. So thank you very much.
Thanks so much indeed, Daniel. Last 2 years, Daniel has been our executive director, and we've been learning how to have an executive director, just as Daniel's been learning how to be an executive director. We have really, really appreciated Daniel's contributions to SOCAN over the last couple of years, and we're really sorry to see him go, but of course, everybody has a right to their own lives. One of the things that Kathy and I have said for years and years and years of teaching is, you know what the worst thing about teaching is? The good students damn well graduate. Anyway, what we are doing, we're going to organize, we have organized a farewell, appreciation and farewell drop-in. Daniel said, I don't want anything with pageantry. I promised him we wouldn't have any speeches. We're just going to hold a short appreciation drop-in. Friday, June the 5th, put it on your calendar. Common Block Courtyard, we're hoping it's going to be a nice day. We'll be outside. 4 to 6 p.m., come out to Common Block and express, as we will be doing, appreciation to Daniel for all he's done for us. Thank you very much indeed.